Pleasant good afternoon to each of you. This is it's 12:03 and we're about to start today's session. We are delighted that you are able to join us. I am Dr. Errol Bolden, a full professor at Coppin State University in the Department of Social Work. And I'm delighted to be the moderator for the session entitled Social Justice and Philanthropy, Fundraising Ethically and Authentically. Without any further delay, because we hope to end this session promptly at 1 p.m., but we're looking forward to a very spirited discussion here this evening and this afternoon. And to make sure that this occurs, two lovely ladies that I would like to introduce to you now. First, I have the pleasure of introducing you to C artist, or CC, Gardner Glazer. And she is an advocate for social impact and social justice work. CC began her career in the tech sector, later transitioning to nonprofit work to better fulfill her purpose and passion. CC moved from working in nonprofits to the fundraising side to increase her impact and is now entrenched in the philanthropic sector. CC was the first director of programs and strategic initiatives at Satterberg Foundation, whose mission focuses on promoting a just society and sustainable environment. In 2021, CC left the Satterberg Foundation and started Black Ivy Collective. She currently serves on the boards of Andrus Family Foundation, Charlotte Martin Foundation, Philanthropy Northwest, Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, or EPIP, and GRIS. Welcome. Next, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Jessica, or Jess, Solomon. And she is an organization development practitioner and cultural steward, helping develop more impactful, creative, and equitable organizations to meet this moment. Since 2015, her firm, Art in Praxis, has facilitated change at the nexus of arts and culture, social justice, and philanthropy, building capacity for people and progressive organizations to create bold visions and actionable outcomes that advance missions. AIP's client partners include national and place-based cultural institutions, social justice networks, and philanthropic organizations. Previously, Jess's practice took her in-house to the Robert W. Dush Foundation in Baltimore, Maryland, where as vice president, she spent 3 years sharpening the institution's place-based arts and culture grant-making strategy, leading organizational change initiatives, and strategically growing their philanthropic footprint to drive more equitable impact. Jess holds an MS in Organization Development from American University and a BA in Communication Studies and African American Studies from the University of Maryland, College Park. She is a former National Arts Strategies Creative Community Fellow, Salzburg Global Forum for Young Cultural Innovators Fellow, and Grant Makers for Effective Organizations Change Leaders in Philanthropy Fellows. Jess is an emerging collector of Black contemporary art by women and gender non-conforming artists, hashtag Jess Collects, and is writing a dark comedy inspired by her collection. She is also a proud graduate of Western High School. Please join me in welcoming these two ladies to guide us in the session, as I stated before, that is entitled Social Justice and Philanthropy, Fundraising Ethically and Authentically. Ladies, as we begin this session, I'm going to give each of you a minute or two to add something that you may think may be important for us to know that was not read. And before I get to the first question, again, good afternoon and welcome. Let's first start with Ms. Glaze.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here with you all. And Dr. Bolden, I think you got it all in the bio, and I think some more will come out as we dive deeper in this conversation. So just happy to be here. And also just a note, I'm on this little island outside of Seattle, so my internet is like, it worked great yesterday, but today is a new day. So I may go off video off and on just to give y'all a heads up. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Solomon, welcome.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bolden. I gotta make that bio shorter, but I appreciate you. I don't have anything to add right now. I'm really excited to jump into our discussion.
Okay, great. So the first question I would like to pose to both of you is, how do you see fundraising as a tool for social justice?
Well, the first thing I want to share is, if you're in this room and you are interested you're interested in social justice and fundraising and how those can overlap, I highly recommend that you read Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva. I actually just found it in my office. Really powerful book that lays out strategies for restoring balance and healing as it relates to philanthropy, particularly communities who have been harmed by philanthropy, and what's the role of fundraisers and grant makers in remedying a lot of that trauma and harm. So fundraising as a tool for social justice, I think that's also, there's some deliberation that goes around that, like deciding that fundraising will be a tool for social justice. And I think that if that's the case, there has to be a understanding of how power shows up and how power and race play out in philanthropy. And I think fundraisers need to understand, based on, depending on where they sit and what the organization is and who they are, recognizing the power that they may be bringing into that conversation, advocating and speaking on behalf of communities who are not in the room. So those are the things that come to mind. I also feel like philanthropy should be the R&D of social justice. Like, philanthropy should be funding all the things. And this idea of risk, I think, is code sometimes. What does risk mean in relationship to community? I have more questions about that, but I'll stop there. So get this book, understand how power and race show up if this is where you're headed. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And just to make note, Ms. Glazer put the link for that book in the chat to make it easier for you. Ms. Glazer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Jess, yeah, I mean, all the things about Edgar and Decolonizing Wealth, if you haven't read it, please pick it up. It's everything that Jess said. And I think when I think about fundraising as a tool for social justice, fundraising is really about building relationships. So just thinking about, how do you move out there in the world? Are you a part of the communities you're fundraising for? And also, I think really sometimes we need to just be real and ground the fundraising work and the social justice work in kind of how we got to where we are now. Why are there so many foundations? Why are there so many people with tons and tons of money? And how do these rich folks also continue to make money? And really in a time that was very difficult and challenging for people of color around COVID and the pandemic. And that kind of really highlighted a lot of things, but I always like to kind of go back to the historical space of this country and the land that we're on. Like, we don't get to these amounts of wealth and kind of the and inequity without stolen land and attempted genocide of indigenous folks, as well as the free labor on the backs of Black bodies in the US. Like, we've built this, and from there on are the imbalances as to why folks have amassed wealth and have resources, whereas other folks do not, particularly Black and Indigenous people. So really thinking about where are you in proximity to those relationships as you're thinking about fundraising for community organizations, and thinking about the spaces that are under-resourced. It's not just for the last 10 years, 20 years, it's actually for a couple hundreds of years that the communities have been under-resourced. And now I think is a time where Edgar also talks about just this idea of returning resources to community and kind of moving into that direction. So not thinking of it as so much as oh, I need to, are we going to get this grant? And then people being able to have the charity mindset, feeling good about giving the money to like the poor Black and brown kids or whatever. But actually, philanthropy is just the love of your fellow people. And we need to act like we believe that when we're in this work. And I would say the other thing around fundraising as social justice is just really showing up in real and right relationships with folks. I mean, I don't know if you all have those friends that you only see when they need to borrow a couple dollars, that of course they're gonna pay you back when they get their taxes. And I think I'm still waiting on that, but I need to actually see you in between those moments. So don't just call me or reach out to me when it's fundraising, when I see those emails at the end of the year, because it's end of year giving. Like, I haven't heard from you all year. It would be great to know what y'all are up to in the in between, right? So so I think relationships are at the key, but also just wanting to drive home that how do we even get here? Why some people got all the money and other people don't have any? And then moving forward and fundraising from that space.
Thank you. So go ahead.
Cece, you are preaching to the, well, not preaching to the choir, but I hear you, and I'm so grateful that you brought up the relationship piece. I think sometimes grantees might feel like they don't feel comfortable reaching out or may not know what to say, but I think it's important to remember that the people who are advocating on your behalf in these institutions are also people, right? And so oftentimes have to go and make the case for why a certain thing should be funded. And the more they know, and the relationship, being in a relationship helps them to make the case. And I also think that, fundraisers, yes, financial resources, but there also may be other ways that you can get support or request support from foundations. Oftentimes, well, when I was a funder, we were often the first funder for a lot of our grantees. And we knew that investment was a signal to other folks in philanthropy to take a risk, which is ridiculous. But we knew that was our role. And so we leaned into that, and we will also make introductions. So it's something as simple as, who else should be funding us, right? Like, you got it right. Who else should be funding us? Can you make the introduction? Can you host an event with other funders in the room? So getting creative about how you are in relationship with them, asking them, what are your priorities right now? Oh, and introducing other organizations to them. I think that's important. I feel like fundraisers, there's an opportunity to think about like collective impact and other, are there other fundraisers or other organizations doing similar work where you can actually create a new opportunity that would generate more resources. And the last thing I'll say about like knowing where the money comes from, that can really demonstrate and point to the need for fundraising as a tool for social justice. So my former employer, the namesake, was a smart guy who got a GI Bill and was able to go to MIT and study physics and then start a firm and make a lot of money and then create a foundation. My grandfather also served, smart guy, did not get a GI Bill, right? So we can point to real ways that systems were built to keep certain communities out of wealth generation. And so that points to the need for them to release those funds into these communities. So I just wanted to kind of co-sign what Cece was saying.
Thank you. And I just want to let the folks in the room know that just make note of your questions. After we've asked these 4 questions, we'll create some space that you can hopefully get a couple of your questions answered as well. Okay. Next question. How have you seen storytelling change in fundraising over the years? How have you seen storytelling change in fundraising over the years? Let's start with Ms. Glazer.
Okay. I think storytelling, it's more, I feel like it's more real now. So the piece that has really changed is the narrative. So no longer do folks from community organizations, from nonprofits, we no longer need to kind of sell that the poverty porn and talk about our community with deficits. Like now we can talk from a strengths-based space. You know, and for foundations, it's like, and here's what we do, here's how amazing we are, and how we're still doing all of this in spite of the systems that have built up around us. And here's an opportunity for you to be a part of our work. So for funders, it's your pleasure to return the resources to us to continue to serve the communities in the way we need to serve them. But no longer do we need to show up in these spaces and like tell the story unless we want to, but really share our story actually without getting something in exchange. So like when I worked at Satterberg Foundation, if we went to a site visit and a nonprofit like actually shared a piece of their story, we were not leaving there until I had board members also share their stories. Like you're not here to extract and consume without leaving something on the table, and you're about to be vulnerable too. People need to fully show up, but I don't think I think we're in a space where there's strong narrative change. I'm also thinking about community-centric fundraising. That's something I'm sure you all know about, but it is really like grounding us in the space of community and relationship. And I think if there's a way that we can really share our stories in the way that we control and we've decided we want to share our stories, we're able to do that. And also trying to move to a space where stories are actually data. So often we hear people want to know, well, how many sandwiches did you serve? And you know, how many people did you serve this year and all of that? But really, it's like, okay, if I give you an anecdote so many times, I mean, working with funders and being a funder, it's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, that's really cool. Like hearing about how this child was able to change their trajectory or whatever, but how many kids? And I'm like, really? Like the anecdote, that's your data. That's what I'm giving you. You don't get to say that our lived experience for real in these spaces through this work isn't actually data. It's qualitative data. It's not quantitative, but it's still data. And that's kind of the stuff that we need. Like we don't need all the numbers and everything anymore. And honestly, our like foundation's really reading that stuff, right? I know some that aren't. So if we can move to storytelling and showing up in our full humanity while not putting up our stories for consumption and extraction, I think that there will start to be a shift.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan.
I'm seeing storytelling. I'm seeing more expansive storytelling that's including operations and the people. And I'm seeing requests to invest in back office projects and things that don't necessarily, get people excited. It gets me excited, but don't get a lot of people excited. So I'm seeing more stories about how the operations feed into the things that, people tend to love and how important that is. I actually just recently received a small business grant for some marketing support. And I was very frank about why that's necessary and the challenges of running a small business during COVID. So it wasn't a lot of, fluff and flowery poetics. It was some really honest reflections on why this is important right now. And I knew, I was like, if I get it, then they really understand where I'm coming from. And so that felt good to be seen in that way. So to speak my truth and then to be, to receive the grant felt affirming in a lot of ways. I do have 2 quick cautionary tales about storytelling that I'm sure some folks can understand or relate to. So I was a participant in like a college prep program in high school. And then I ended up volunteering with them. And then it became my first job out of college. So you can already imagine that I was like the poster child for the organization, right? So they would ship me out to meetings. I mean, I got to sit with, political folks and rich people and whatever. And, I felt like I was learning and growing. A lot of money was, a lot of resources were generated around that work. And at the time, I didn't know what I didn't know. I was young. I was excited to be a part of this organization. And my story helped them net a lot of resources. Well, a decade later, they recently asked me to come and be a part of a fundraiser, and not much had changed. I've definitely changed. And so I had to decline because it felt very much like I was being paraded out again. But the only change in the organization that I noticed was that the word equity was like splattered around in the mix now versus 10 years ago. And that felt like a missed opportunity. And I definitely am going to follow up with them because I care about the organization, but so that's the thing. So I've seen organizations that have not evolved. And then the second example is when I was a funder, I received an inquiry from a Black-led program in Baltimore that was creating much needed green space for children in the city. And she kept referring to her program or the participants as minorities in the application. And I understood that she was using language that she thought a funder would connect to. But for me, it was dissonance because Baltimore is a majority Black city. It's a Black city. And I actually asked her if I could give her this feedback. And I made it very clear that Black children are not the minority. And it's wild that these children don't have access to green, safe space. That's the story. It's not helping the minorities. It's actually like a huge problem that these children don't have what they need. So she was able to receive that feedback and was able to pivot and tell her story in a different way, in a place of power that really began to net her a lot of resources and awards and accolades for the work, because the work was really powerful, but you couldn't really get to it like the way she was handing it to us. So those are 2 examples of things that I've seen as it relates to storytelling that, one organization was able to make the pivot and one very much still needs to do that.
Thank you for those 2 key pointers. The next question, and we will continue with you, Ms. Solomon, is what are some things to avoid when using clients for fundraising, such as marketing materials, sharing stories, photos, etc.? What are some things to avoid?
Well, I would even say look at the client as collaborator and, helping craft a story. Use their voice and get approval before you start sharing things far and wide, because that could end up coming back to bite you in a way that is way more impactful than what you actually were seeking to do. I would also think about how can this opportunity be a personal or professional development moment for them, right? Like maybe there's a chance to work on public speaking or learn more about marketing. If there's space to do that. and you know, and also think about what does compensation and reciprocity look like. You know, cut a check if possible. If not, really get creative about what that looks like to acknowledge their labor and contribution to what you are producing. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank
Yes.
you.
I love the piece of that you said, Jess, about thinking of you know, grantee partners as collaborators through this work, and actually allowing the space for them to show up and to, like, whether it's storytelling, marketing, or whatever. Like, how would you share this information? Because it oftentimes looks completely different than what a fundraiser has put together, and then you show it to the grantee partner. I've had this experience. We partnered with an organization that partnered with incarcerated people, and I remember getting the grant application, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" So when I went back and met with the incarcerated folks, I showed it. I was like, "How would you say this? You see this? This is the application. This one," and they were like, "What the hell? Like, that's not who we are, and we would not talk about ourselves like this." So then they actually overtook that piece, and they write the grant applications now so that they're able to tell their own story. I think, just as Jess said, like, compensating folks, like whether it's an honorarium, or so definitely do not have grantee partners show up, or, you know, or your clients show up and then are expected to put the labor in for you to raise the funds. I mean, I went to one event, this is a couple of years ago, and it served kids, Black and brown kids. And I remember when it got time to do the fundraising, right? The kids are on the stage, introduce themselves, and then it was the raise the paddle thing. And y'all know where I'm going, right? Like, what was the image I got with these kids on the stage? And then you got an auctioneer, and he's like, oh, 2000, blah. And I was like, oh, hell no. So followed up with that organization. I was like, don't you ever in your life do that again. Like, if you invite, these young people to the event, they are guests. And they get to have fun. They're going to eat dinner, and they are just hanging out with their friends. You don't need to mix them in the tables, which are big donors and all of that. They don't want to talk to them. Invite them out to have fun, but you better not ever in your life, let me see you put these kids up on the stage again and immediately start doing a raise the paddle. I mean, it was so foul, and it was like people didn't even make that connection. So it's often, like, as a funder, it's like we really have to think about how we're asking folks to engage in the work, and why is it that now we've created this narrative where nonprofits think this is how they have to come to funders. And I think because funders have made it seem like, they're in these powerful positions. We have all these dollars. We have the dollars. You need the dollars. When actuality, like, if you have a foundation, your role is to return the resources to community. So actually, you need us in the community to return the resources to. You need the nonprofits. So how about we actually kind of, and I talked to Edgar about this too a lot, like, how do we actually just get foundations to start applying to nonprofits? So, like, when I was at Satterberg, we created something where we actually go to the organization, and I'm like, hey, we have $100,000. We'd love to partner with you. Here's who we are and what we do and how we show up. Do y'all even want to rock with us? But there's no application. It's like, do you even want to partner with us? And making sure that we're not asking them to bring in clients to show us, or will there be folks there to tell our stories? To tell their stories, and we really need that because I need to feel really good when I give you back this money that isn't even mine, kind of thing. So and the photos, how many of y'all, like, if you've worked at a nonprofit, I ain't been at that nonprofit for 8 years. Why my picture still on the website? Y'all ain't hired no more Black people. Like, take all the pictures down. If you don't actually know these people, take the pictures down. Did you even ask the people in the community if you could put their photo up? And actually, I'm flattered that you think of me as a model, and I actually need to get my coins. How many clicks is my picture bringing in here, you know? So I think there's tons of ways that I think we really have to pause and think about how we're asking clients to be involved. And it should be, again, going back to what Jess said, as a collaborator, as a partner in this work, and how do we even want to market ourselves to the community and to funders. But we have to pay people for their time, because they have jobs and they have lives. And actually, this isn't their work. You know, this is your job. So, I mean, you getting a check, can I get a cut? Like, what's my piece if I come in and talk to y'all or show up for the funders? I need to get a couple dollars as well. So I think we try to be really careful about when we ask people to show up, and we have to pay people for their time in the same way we're being paid. We can't just expect like, this is for you, so you got to show up and talk to these people, tell them your sad story and all of that. I don't think we need to do that anymore.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit about the discussion with the college athlete that has occurred for a number of years. We are pleased to see the changes that have occurred, but we know there's still much to do as far as that is concerned. And I particularly liked also the comment you or the question you pose is how do we get fundraisers to apply for nonprofits? Well, time permitting, it would be interesting to get some feedback for some others. But the last question I want to pose to both of you before I open it up and allow participants to ask some questions is, what are some good questions to ask ourselves when evaluating whether we are creating fundraising materials to ensure that it is authentic and ethical? Let me repeat that. What are some good questions to ask ourselves when evaluating whether we are creating fundraising material to ensure that it is authentic and ethical? Who wants to go first? I particularly didn't suggest.
I'll go. I don't have a set of questions, but there's something about, could having children on a stage with a paddle at an auction cause some harm, right? Like, could it cause, asking the question, could this image be interpreted the wrong way? Could the way we're phrasing this, so asking those questions, I think it's important to, I don't know, it seems like over the last 2 weeks, so many things have been happening in the world that I'm like, who is the committee? Like, how did this even happen? Seriously, like, I feel like
Bad and Bougie.
Yes, like,
that book.
Right. How did that even happen? So I wonder about, in the development fundraising realm, maybe there's a group of community stakeholders, staff, people who can just do a once over before something goes out, or there's a conversation with them before. I just feel like there has to be some checks and balances in place, like a policy, like a practice of doing that when creating fundraising material that involves stakeholders and people who would be represented by these materials. So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, Ms. Glazer, be ready for you.
Yes. Everything that Jess said, because that was exactly what I was thinking. Sometimes you see some fundraising materials and you're like, how many people did this? I mean, come on, like, how many people saw this and nobody thought, we probably shouldn't have the kids up there while they asking for the money? Nobody thought that. And I think sometimes like, and I can't think of like good questions to ask ourselves, but I mean, everything that we're asking of other folks, would we want to be in those positions? I think the other thing is, let's pay attention to who we're hiring, because so often we're hiring folks, particularly in fundraising positions. Oftentimes you'll see that's where white folks are within nonprofits. because they're communicating with the foundations and other funders. So it may be like, okay, this is like where we need this person because we really need to raise these dollars. And then when we're trying to hire people from the community, it's like, oh, well, they don't really have experience in fundraising or philanthropy. And I'm like, hello, have you met Black people? All we do is fundraise all the time. Like my cousin, oh, he's going to college. Okay, everybody, I need your money because we about to send Jolene to school. And then everybody show up, right? Like, I always share this story of my grandmother when we think about the way that funding works. I share the story of my grandmother that had all these grandkids, and she would send, I don't know how she kept this calendar, but she would send everybody $5 or like the Barnes and Noble gift card every year on their birthday. And I remember my youngest kid, who's a whole mess, was like, Gigi, I mean, I appreciate this, but like, I don't want the gift card. Can you just do $5 every year? And my grandma was like, oh, okay. I see you, like, I'll do the $5 every year. So I'm like, my grandmother as a funder, she is a multi-year funder. She listened to the community and now they get unrestricted funding. Okay, so it's like philanthropy is not hard. It's relationships and listening and I think it really is just being a part of the community. So this idea when folks are applying for jobs as fundraisers within organizations, we're like, but you've never worked as a fundraiser. We've never, you don't have the skills. Like, actually, what are the skills? The skills are actually people skills. Can you build relationships? Can you talk to people? And are you going to show up? And I think it's really strong to have people in fundraising roles that are from the community, because they can reach out to folks and say like, oh, here's the appeal I'm sending out. Like, what do y'all think? Is this all right? Or should we add this? And that's where, as Jess talked about, the collaboration comes in. But I think it's like we have to just pull the veil back on philanthropy, and it is not real. It's like they have all these rules. Oh, we got to get the site visit, the application, the LOI. Why? The only thing philanthropy has to do is give out that 5% a year. That's a minimum. And the only reason 5% is the magical number is because that's the number that you can give out and still make money on your corpus. And every year it looks like you haven't actually given out any money because you actually made more than you gave out. But so it's like, I mean, and I think that's the thing is just, I live for the day that we just start showing up and telling funders about themselves, reminding them as they're judging us, well, what are you going to do with the money? Or, okay, give me a report on how you spent your check. Who's checking for you? Why are you asking me questions? And I think the other thing also is, as we're trying to look at should the marketing materials look like and how are we going to increase our fundraising goals, is thinking, now there's this push for equity. Everyone wants to be in equity, racial justice. They didn't read all the books. They had a lot of time over these last 2 years, and they know all the things and they're ready to go. And they're like, hey, well, we got to talk to these nonprofits. What's your board look like? What's your staff look like? Are you BIPOC led? And it's a really cool term. I just learned about it. I went to this training. So are you BIPOC led and all the things? And now it's like, when I meet with funders, I'm like, oh, here's your application. This is what you're asking. I'm about to ask y'all all these questions. What's your board look like? What's your staff look like? Because you don't get to question nonprofits about things that y'all not even holding up, so, but now everyone's feeling empowered and emboldened because they read a couple of books and they're racial justice experts when they haven't actually changed the way that they do the work, and they're expecting all nonprofits to shift overnight because funders, I don't know, like attitudes are shifting. I'm like, oh my gosh, did you know that like people are being murdered, Black people are being murdered, and like, we got to do something. And I'm like, slow down. People was being murdered yesterday. Last year, y'all wasn't doing nothing. So the urgency needs to stop, and you actually just need to shift the whole thing. So I think even as we talk about fundraising, it's like, we're trying to shape things for the funder, right? Like what's palatable to the funder. And I don't know. I just don't want, I mean, that's probably why I don't work at foundation anymore. I just don't want to do that anymore. Like the power is in the community, not the funders, because they can't get their 5% out without the community.
Very true. Thank you so very much, ladies. Ms. Solomon, you wanted to add something else?
No, I just said amen. That's all.
Okay, good. Let's turn to the participants. If you have a question you would like to ask or a comment you would like to make, if you would raise your hands, or just a small group. So I think it shouldn't be difficult to manage at all. But you can unmute. I think you can unmute yourself, or I would have to unmute you. I'm unsure. But just if you can raise your hand or indicate in some way, we will try to do so. And there are two of us who are monitoring the chat. Questions, comments? It was a spirited session. I have a question, but I don't want to be the first to go. There's a comment from Michael, says, nice of you sharing your experiences. So let me put Michael on the spot, if I may. You indicated that it was nice. Is there a particular set of information that was shared that resonated with you most powerfully, and why? I know you may think that I'm putting you on the panel, but if you don't mind answering that, Michael, I'm sure the presenters would love to hear.
Well, yeah, thank you, Doc. You're not putting me on the spot. This is Michael Along. I work with University of Maryland College Park Extension. So I'm in the office at this moment, and there's some background, too much information going on, which will not allow me to talk too much. But if you can go first, I know you refrain from going first, but if you can go first, that will give us some more time probably to gather some more information to throw it in. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do so.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. In referring, if I can take the presenters back to the second question, as far as how have you seen storytelling change in fundraising over the years? My question is for you to elaborate on that a little bit, and that I want to ask, has the internet or social media, or how has the internet or social media influenced this in any way? The storytelling, how has the internet or social media influenced this?
So my firm, one of our early experiments was to connect social justice organizations with artists, because it seemed like there was an opportunity to tell more robust stories through visuals, performance, really leaning into different mediums to talk about the work. And so, that was like 10 years ago, and seeing how organizations have now, begun to animate their annual reports, or partner with artists to talk about what the programming looks like, commissioning work from artists that's rooted in the mission of the organization. I've seen that take shape recently. I feel like, Twitter town halls have been things that popped up. There's an app called Clubhouse where it's an audio app. People get on there and talk about topical things as it relates to their organizations. I've also seen people raise money through those venues. I feel like there have been so many platforms created to make it easy for people to become patrons, or, one-time supporters, paying, every month, through memberships. It feels like technology has created more opportunities for people to get in, to invest and donate in ways that you oftentimes don't even really think about it. I think that's an opportunity for fundraisers to really cultivate those relationships and, think through, what does a pipeline look like? Oh, you started donating $5 a month. What does it look like to come and participate in program and then maybe donate $25 a month and tell your friends, host an event. Like there are ways to build on the platforms, the social media and technological platforms that exist. And I would like to see more of that. As somebody who donates, you know, as an individual person, I would like to see more of that. So perhaps fundraisers can think about adding those requests for investment in those platforms in their proposals, right? Like helping, like making the case for why that might be an important longer term investment for those organizations. So.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Glazer.
Yeah, I mean, I think with social media, it's changed the game as far as accessibility for folks. So people get to tell their own stories now. People have the power to share what they want, like from the community, from the organization they work at. We don't necessarily need like the interpreter anymore. So people can actually own that's the space to tell their own stories. And I think that's the positive piece that also came out of the pandemic was having more online Zoom events. So it just made everything more accessible for people and really provide an opportunity to shift the way that we fundraise, whereas oftentimes it's like major donors, like, oh, VIPs, you know, if you gave this much, you get to come to this party. And then the folks that give the $5 a month or whatever act like where's their special recognition or something. But now there's opportunities to have like IG lives and different things like that to actually invite people into the space in a way that folks just haven't thought about. So I'm hoping that some of those things actually stick around once we go back to more in person. People actually are starting to are starting to more respect kind of like the community donor that's giving, because you have more, you know, when people start to do their fundraising, if they have an appeal or something going out and then they have their pyramid, it's like we need 2 people at this amount and then 5 people at this amount, and always in the presentation it is like, and we need 100 or 200 people at this smaller amount. So it's like that's actually where you have access to the most people, but you haven't actually been treating them you know, treating them with the power that they actually hold. You're treating the few with more power, that just because they're giving more dollars. But it's, I mean, I think the way that folks for their nonprofits have mobilized during COVID, I mean, there's so many different ways. We've had folks trying to partner with other people that work at corporate organizations that maybe give a match, like a 3-to-1 match or a 2-to-1 match. So that, I mean, it's been creative thinking in the way that folks have used social media to really get the message out and to share their own stories. But I think that's the biggest thing. It doesn't have to be crafted in any kind of way, but folks get to own it themselves.
Yes, thank you. There's a comment and a question in the chat from Marilyn Aiklin. Please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but the comment followed by the question reads, I know several young Black nonprofit leaders who operate programs that multiple white-led foundations are interested in funding. However, the nonprofit leaders are skeptical of receiving funds from them because they have a history of dictating operations. Do you have examples of successful communal fundraising models that they could research and consider implementing?
I know I'm looking at the question too. Yeah, oftentimes funders want to come in with the power and be like, oh, I'll give you this money, but you have to change these 5 things. And I think I mean, if we can move into a space where we actually can take the money because it's actually ours, you don't have a spot on the board, you're not buying, like it's not a pay to play. So take the money, it's your money anyway. And then I think in the meantime, actually, and then if I don't know of any models, but if there's a way to actually leverage those resources into bringing in like community models of fundraising. Like, because sometimes we can use the resources from a funder to even, and then bring in the community to decide what happens with those dollars. Some kind of way like that where we can collaborate with the other money that's coming in. But there should, I mean, the expectation should be shut down of like folks thinking we're going to give this money and now we get to tell you how to run the show. So that should just be clear up front. And I think more and more people are getting that feedback. Funders are definitely starting to hear that. But there's some that aren't quite ready to hear that. But yeah, sorry, I can't think of any models. I mean, I think it's still a work in progress. But we can take the money and they don't get to tell us what to do with it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the first thing when I read it, I got curious. I'm like, yeah, this could be an opportunity for those leaders to work together, you know, across organizations, if it's different organizations, and really hold the funder accountable and create some kind of community benefits agreement, or just an agreement that makes it very clear that they're gonna take this money and do their work. And your interest in us speaks to why you need to just fund us and leave us alone. But I don't know if you're in the DMV area, but as far as like grassroots or community-based fundraising, I'm thinking about Diversity Fund, which is a social justice giving circle that's really grown. And now funders, Philanthropy gives them money to disseminate to Black and Brown social justice projects in DC. And I was a part of the program as someone who made grants. I received a grant and I also raised money for them. And there might be some organizations in that network that could be of help for them, but I would not walk away from those coins. Like, I feel like this is the moment to actually hold the funder accountable and ensure that they will not get in the way of operations. Dr. Bolden, I saw, yeah, Kim.
Yes, Kim. Yeah, so Kim Weiner.
Thank you. Dr. Bolden, thank you. And Cece, Jess, thank you so much for this conversation. There's been so many little nuggets that I'm taking away from here, but one thing that has really stood out to me that is really resonate with my organization at the moment is that we've been an organization that has not really taken quantitative data. So Cece, your comments around qualitative data really stood out to me, that we've really switched a lot of our models over the past probably 2 years to try to get more quantitative data, because it's something that we keep hearing from the funders, but it feels like we're not being true to the clients that we're serving, because we have no income guidelines. This is not, anyone can get our services for free. It's, we're a cancer focused organization. So if you have cancer, you can get services from what we do. And it's something I've struggled with, and I'm just not sure really where to go with these conversations, because to get these funding, we need to have the quantitative data. So I'm so happy to hear there's organizations that are switching that model from the funding perspective. I currently haven't really seen that been happening. So I'm curious of thoughts of maybe some conversations that you've had with funders, or you've seen be successful, that we might be able to utilize with this issue.
I think some of the conversations that I feel like Philanthropy like has gaslit all of us. So I've been in rooms where people are asking questions and I'm thinking like, it seems like we would just do this. And I'm like, maybe I don't know all the things. But really that's what it is. So like I have started like even just going to like my kids when they were little, I tell them to do something and they're like, but why? But why? And that is like, I've had conversations with funder after funder, because first thing I do when I'm meeting with folks is pull their applications if I can, or ask them to send it. And I'm like, oh, so why do you ask this? And they're like, well, no, it's just what's always been done. They don't actually need that information.
Yeah.
you know? So I think that like that's the conversation we have to continue to have more and more. So, and sometimes the other thing that I like to do is like before I talk to nonprofits and they're like, I've talked to this funder and they ask me these questions and I'm like, who is it? And I have no problem like reaching out to folks as someone that's also in philanthropy. I'm like, oh, I'd love to talk to you, you know, like how you all do this work, you know, and then I just show up and ask the questions because as someone on the funding side, like I don't have, you know, we're in the spaces now, and I know they're like, who let these people in? But now we're like able to hold them accountable, and as more and more people from community and organizers get into philanthropy, we're all asking the questions. So a lot of times we'll partner with nonprofits and say like, you know, I'm kind of like the big sister, like they said, what to you? Give me their number. I'm gonna reach out to them. I'm not gonna mention you, but I think that's the kind of organizing that we have to do within philanthropy to start to shift things. The more and more that peer funders are like, why are y'all doing that? Like, actually, you don't have to do that. And before they would just say, when we weren't asking for that data, they're like, oh, you guys don't know what you're doing. You know, they're like, you don't get it. And actually, it's like we've seen organizations transform over the last like 3 to 5 years because they've just been able to focus on their work. And, you know, they have long-term funding and things like that. And then the work completely has an opportunity to shift when we're no longer centering the funder or the donor. And that's where what we have to get away from. So if you all have anybody you want like to reach out to, like, let me know. I enjoy that. It's like, it's fun. So.
Well, thank you. I can learn a thing or two.
Cece, I wish we were colleagues when I worked at the philanthropy. I felt I was lonely a lot. You know, a lot of my peers and other organizations could not move the way we move, and it was really frustrating. So
yeah. I know. I was thinking, dang, we got to start our own.
Well, it seems like a challenge, right? Ladies, thank you so very much. Kim, do you have any other comments before I turn over to the gentleman who pulled this all together, Brandon?
I just want to say thank you again, really, Dr. Bolden, Cece, and Jess, Brandon, and to the IDEA Committee of AFP Maryland. Thank you all so much for coming together and putting together this amazing program. This was such a great discussion, and I know I personally deeply benefited from this and have a lot of thoughts to consider with the work that I'm doing and bringing back to my organization. And I think I can speak for the group that we all have a little bit to think through. So I just want to thank you for your time and really supporting this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you all. It has been my pleasure to be the moderator for this session. And at this time, without any further delay, I would like to turn the session, as we prepare to close, over to the person who pulled it all together, Brandon Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Bowden. Kim, I was going to ask you to have some last words as our president, but you've already done that. So thank you, and definitely appreciate you for being on. Definitely want to thank our panelists, Cece and Ms. Jess, and everyone that participated today. So just one announcement, and then we can just close out because this has just been great. Next week is our final panel discussion. This has been an awesome month. But Wednesday, April 27th, we have DEI practices in HR, recruiting and retaining top talent equitably. And we will have Mr. Robert Henry, who is the Vice President of Development, Culture, and Talent at the Council for Advancement and Support in Education. And then we have Stephanie Miser, who is the Senior Manager, Talent Acquisition Officer Human Resources at The Ohio State University. So that is going to be a really good one. If you're interested, please register. You can go onto the AFP Maryland site, send it to everybody, and that's it. So really, thank you everyone for joining us today. And we look forward to working with you all again and seeing you guys next year for, I guess, part 2 of the social justice. So we'll add 2 more people. But anyway, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye-bye.